Susan Britt.
Thanks, Valerie. Hey, welcome everybody today, and welcome to this record-breaking crowd. And thanks so much for your enthusiasm about today's topic. We are thrilled to be providing this series of webinars around canine communication and really hope they'll be useful for future staff and volunteer training via the recordings. Moderating the chat today are two ASPCA staff members, Dr. Emily Weiss and Trish Lohr. They'll be keeping an eye on the chat for your questions. And with that, I'm really happy to introduce our presenter today. Heather Mohan-Gibbons, Director of Applied Research and Behavior, is with the ASPCA's Shelter Research and Development Team, where her work helps animal shelters save more lives through education, research, and implementing new programs. Heather has over a decade of professional animal behavior experience that includes wildlife, dog training, marine mammals, veterinary clinics, and working in animal shelters. She lectures extensively to a wide audience to improve quality of life for domestic and exotic animals. In 2004, Heather finished her MS degree and earned the Associate Certified Applied Animal Behaviorist certification while running her own animal behavior consulting business. And with that as an introduction, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Heather.
Well, thank you, Susan. And I am very excited to be launching this first webinar with such a great team, and it is the first in a behavior series, so we're very excited to be bringing this to everyone. And we're going to start with body language because it really lays the foundation for all interactions with dogs. And these aspects of body language that you'll learn today will actually be woven in and applied in all of our following webinars, so it's a great way, a great foundation to start with. This first photo, too, I actually really like. It's a dog on a sled dog team, and I would help out with some of the sled dog races. And on race day, they pull dogs out and put them on a long line while they're getting their sled ready. And I think this photo, when most people see it, they're drawn to this dog's eyes because, I mean, they're very blue and they're in the center of the photo. But if you look closer, you can see that he's tucked under his line, which is actually along the side of a truck. So his body is safely under the truck, but his head is peeking out. And our goal today is to really help you look closer at body language as we go through. Let's see if I have, yes, okay. So our agenda today is to observe behavior objectively, so rather than using labels, which we typically do. Identify components of canine body language, which will break it down with eyes, ears, mouth, etc., and then learn how to put it all together. Starting with subjective versus objective behavior. The language we use is critical. So how we describe behavior can have profound effects, and this applies whether you're a veterinarian working in a shelter, you're a dog guardian. Language is really crucial, and unfortunately our language is often riddled with assumptions about our own perceptions or our interpretations, and really we can be clouded by our bias on how we use language. It can really lead to misunderstandings. So this can be when describing the dog to each other. So if you're working in a shelter and you're trying to describe behavior behind a kennel door, or you're a groomer or in a vet clinic, and also when we're actually interacting with the dog directly. So let's start with a definition. Subjective would be arising out of or identified by the means of one's perception of one's own states and processes. Basically, we're labeling the animal. And in this photo, you'd see a picture. The subjective statement that I would use for this photo would be, this dog is happy. And a lot of us can look at that and we might think that. Contrast that to objective. So expressing or dealing with facts or conditions as perceived without distortion by personal feelings, prejudices, or interpretation when describing behavior. And really the key points I want to look at here is facts and distortion or interpretation. So when you use objective language, it's really what a video camera could see. So it's not interspersing our images interpretation. It's really what the video camera could see. So with this same dog, I might say, this dog has an open mouth and his eyes are squinty. So that's something that all of us looking at this photo could agree upon. This language really keeps us on track about what's being communicated by the dog. So let's give it a try, actually. So I want to give you just a moment to change the following statement. The subjective statement is, when the doorbell rings, my dog goes crazy. So I'll give you a moment just to write it down on a piece of paper, but how might you change this statement of my dog goes crazy into a more objective one, so something that could describe what a dog is actually doing. And I'll give you just a few moments.
We got some good ones, Heather.
Yeah, and I don't know how many people are signed up, but good. So some people are actually typing them into chat, which is fine. Some of you have some great examples, and really there's no wrong answer here, right? Someone could say, my dog barks out the window while standing on the couch, or I can't even keep up with them. Actually, they're coming in too fast to see it. Maybe your dog would spin in circles and grabs his tail in his mouth, or he jumps up. Good. He could also run under the table, for example. Maybe he crouches while trembling with his ears back and his tail tucked. All of these are great examples of objective statements, so it sounds like you're right on track. So I want to think about behavior and how the language we use and how we describe it. So I really want to stress to avoid using labels whenever possible. So instead, actually describe it. And you could think about behavior falling on a spectrum rather than an absolute. So one example would be, in this photo here, there's someone painting. And most of you would probably agree with me if I said, this paint is an orange color. That would be an example of me using an absolute. This is orange paint. Now, if I were to ask you to point to a place on this palette where the orange begins, it is much harder. And that's because we're looking at a spectrum. And behavior is just like that. There are no absolutes. All behavior will fall on a spectrum, which is why the language we use is so important. And applying these labels really doesn't help us because we have this spectrum. So putting photos on this same spectrum, on one hand, on the left, for example, we have a dog with an open mouth, relaxed face, ears are back, eyes are squinty. To the opposite side of the spectrum, where we have a dog that has some facial tension, he's actually growling on the opposite side. And most behavior is going to fall in between. So we have this wide spectrum of behavior that we can look at and try and identify, and that's why using those objective words are going to be so helpful when trying to understand canine body language. So dogs use their whole body, and when learning, it can be really overwhelming to look at a dog out at the dog park and try and capture, ears, mouth, tail up, this whole cascade of things. So in the beginning with this first webinar, we're going to break it down, and you could really think of each body piece being a puzzle, hence the photo of a puzzle. We're going to break down the eyes, the ears, the mouth, really basic, to help lay the foundation so that when we're referring to later on in webinars, that you could refer back to this and it will make sense. So to start, again, this is sort of doubling up on the language aspect, that behavior is not a trait. So that example of, this dog is happy or this dog is aggressive. Those are labels that we're actually putting on the animal. And behavior is not a trait. I mean, just like with people, I'm generally a pretty happy person if I wanted to label myself subjectively, but I have bad days. So it's going to be in context. So what is happening in my day at that time? Or in the example of this picture, we have a dog that's growling and showing his teeth wearing this red coat. And, this dog probably doesn't show this behavior all the time. So to say that this dog is aggressive wouldn't quite, be fair to the dog. However, we could say this dog shows his teeth and growls when, and that's where the context, that environment comes into play. When he's on a leash and a dog is near. And there's probably even more specifics here to think about. It's not just a dog, right? Or it might be. It might be all dogs, that whenever he's on a leash and all dogs come near, he will show this behavior. Or it might just be this particular black lab that is his neighbor, and he has a long history of interactions that weren't necessarily pleasant for him. So again, it's the environment that sets the stage for all behavior to occur. Eyes. Let's start with the eyes. So there are lots of things to consider, and you'll see the layout here. Whenever we're introducing a body part, we'll give you a few bullets of what we're going to look at, and then there will be slides that precede this to give you more detail. So the overview of eyes is there's an eye shape. They can sometimes show the white part of their eye, which is called a sclera. Their eyes can also dilate, their pupils specifically, and of course their eyes can move. So starting with shape, they can have a round or almond shape with little to no tension around their eyes. And this term sometimes uses soft eye, meaning that there's no tension. And you can see both of these photos, the basset on the bottom has a slightly more open eye or rounder eye. This husky on the top has a classic almond shape. When we call it almond, you could almost hold an almond up to your screen and it would fit into the outline of his eye. So again, this is a soft eye. As dogs have more tension, their eyes actually pull open more into a round, what's often called hard eye. A lot of you are familiar with that term. And as their eye pulls open, you may see the whites, and that's called the whale eye. And a lot of times this happens with fear, and it's a universal, actually. Humans even do it too. If we're startled or scared, our eyes pop open, and you can often see more of the whites of our eyes. So it's a really common thing, and it's because of the tension of the eye is actually pulling that eye open a little more that you see the white. Now specifically, I do want to just go into this a little bit more. On the left, you'll see, so all three of these are the same dog. On the left, he's looking forward with that soft eye. In the middle, he's still looking forward, but something is happening in the environment. So his eyes get a little bit rounder, and he has a little bit more tension, so you can see that white part of the eye, that whale eye. And then the same dog on the right, he actually still has that soft eye, but now he's just looking off to the side. And because we're in front, we see a little bit of that white. But you can see the difference between the middle photo and the photo to the right, and that shape of the eye is a little bit different, which kind of tells us, but once he's looking off to the side, as the picture on the right shows, you might see that white, but it's not that hard eye, as you can see in the middle. Okay, so pupil size. As arousal increases, so as dogs get more excited, their eyes can dilate, and this can happen in a lot of different contexts. You can see these photos here, though, show that pupil dilation. The top photo, it's a little dark, but you can see how the middle, the reflection really is what you're seeing of the flash. That pupil is fairly small, and then the pupil is much larger in the bottom photo. And again, all of these things, even though we're looking at very specific items of the body, it's important to keep it in context. So in this photo, we have dogs that have dilated pupils in both. The next photo, or the next slide, I should say, shows the context a little bit more. So you have the dog on the left that had been playing for about 30 minutes, and his mouth is open, his ears are up, his pupils are dilated, the environment is other dogs around that are playing. Compare that to the dog on the right, who has also her pupils are dilated, but her ears are back, and she's showing her teeth. You can see some tension along the muzzle. She's snarling, I'm guessing probably growling, and she's standing over a bone. So they're very different contexts, but you can see there's pupil dilation in both examples. So again, that context is really crucial when you're looking at body language.
Hey, Heather, this is Susan.
Yes.
And just as a clarifying question for the group,
Yes,
Stephen is
please.
asking, are dilated pupils a good thing?
That is a great question. And is it a good thing? You know, my answer is always, who's to say what's good or bad? It really is less about interpreting and more about observing. So to notice that the dog's eyes are dilated is really the first step, and then thinking about the context and what might we do, right? So in the example of this dog on the right that's over the bone, you know, if there was a safety issue, perhaps you might need to rearrange that environment. So stepping in or taking another dog away, or, you know, if there's safety. In the example on the left, for a dog that was in a play situation with other dogs, it might be just fine if they're playing appropriately. But again, it would be that context. If the play is not appropriate and the other dog is avoiding or trying to hide under a table, or I'll actually go into some of those cutoff cues here in just a minute, then it might not be. So it really just depends on the context and the environment. It's a great question. So eye movement. So how they use their eyes can relay information. Now, their eyes can move in all sorts of ways. They may dart back and forth if they're seeking for a piece of kibble on the floor, if they're playing, if they're afraid. It may be fixed on another animal, so still movement with direct eye contact, for example, and that can exist in a lot of different situations. They may have eye contact with you, and that eye contact may be direct and sustained. It may be completely avoiding you. So you may be standing right in front of them and your dog is looking off to the side or sniffing the ground or doing all sorts of things to avoid eye contact. So they can move their eyes in lots of ways. Valerie. So this slide, I'll show you a video, and it's actually going to focus on the eyes. And what it is, I'll just explain it while we get it set up. It's my dog looking out at rabbits that are on the other side of a fence. And this is very predictable. He's on a deck, so he can't chase them. It doesn't matter. Rabbits have this effect. It's very predictable on his pupil dilation. So I'll let it play. And we'll play it again. So you'll actually notice trembling as the camera zooms in, and you'll notice how large his eyes are. Good. Ears. Dogs can move their ears in lots of ways. They can be forward, back, or obviously somewhere in between. They may hold them in position, or they may flip them back and forth.
You have the ball back, Heather.
Oh, okay.
And can I just say that if anyone's having trouble seeing the video, it is recording, and so you can go back to the recording link that I'll be sending you tomorrow.
Thank you, Valerie. Or dogs' ears can be back. For example, in both of these photos, regardless of the shape of the dog's ear, when you look at the base all the way through the tip, they're back. Irregardless of the shape of the dog's ear, they can be forward or back. So in this example, we have a basset on the left. The ear is actually forward. So you can look at the distance, if it helps, between the ear and the corner of the eye. Sometimes that helps with certain dogs. But even though a Basset's ear is long and droopy, they can still move it forward, or in the photo to the right, they can move it back. So there's more distance between the eye and the ear, the base of the ear, I should say. Mouth. Lots of things to consider with the mouth. We have the shape of the lips. We have things that they can do with their mouth, such as lip licking and stress yawning. Is the mouth open or is it closed? Are they vocalizing? And I'll go into these in some detail right now. So the mouth shape. The side of the lip can be pulled back, and that is often called a long lip. If you've heard that term, that's what we're referring to, is the actual corner of the mouth. And if it helps, you could think about where is the eye located. So on a long lip, the corner of the lip is going to line up with, the eye or the edge of the eye, or it might even be even further back towards the ear. Some dogs can really pull their lips back really far. So that's what we're talking about when we say a long lip. The lips are actually pulled back by the eye or even closer to the ear. The lips can also move forward, such as a short lip. And the dog on the right here, that's called a pucker. And Jean Donaldson coined a term, that C shape of the lips. And going back to our behavior spectrum, you can think of dogs, all behavior falls out on this spectrum. So dogs that have a long lip are a little less likely, or more relaxed, or less likely to bite compared to here, this pucker. Dogs are much closer to biting. Short lip. Calming signals is a term coined by Turid Rugas, and really the only two I just want to mention that you pertain to the mouth that I think are worth mentioning is lip licking and stress yawning. Now, both of these are out of context, and what that means is, dogs are going to lick their lips when they finish eating. They're going to yawn when they wake up from sleeping, but we're really looking for out of context. So a change in the environment happened, and the dog starts licking his lips, or you start brushing your dog, for example, and he might stress yawn. So again, it's that change in the environment that we're looking at. And they're not good or bad. It's just just observing that they're happening is really the first step. The mouth can also be open or closed. And you can see the photo here of the contrast. Same dog, actually, within like 2 seconds of each other, these photos were taken. Generally, an open mouth has more relaxed body language associated with it. And as the dog closes their mouth, again, on that spectrum, it doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to bite. It just means that there was a change in the environment. His mouth was now open. Now it's closed. And with that closed mouth, sometimes we escalate even more to potentially growling or even biting. So they're using their teeth. And when dogs feel no choice or lack of escape, so what I mean by that is when we're limiting their choice for escape, and we'll actually talk more about choice in the next webinar, but simply put, if the dog cannot get away, so imagine that he's on the end of a tight leash, or he's tethered, or he's under a table, or he's in a corner, those kinds of environments where they can't escape, they're more likely to use like defensive behavior, so biting, to try and get you to move away. So when they feel less choice, they're more likely to use aggressive behavior. And vocal behavior, it is intended for communication. I mean, dogs are social, so they do have communication that they use, and it's used in all sorts of contexts. So, I mean, you can see these are just a few ways that they can maintain social contact. And really, vocal behavior is common in pretty much a wide variety of situations, except when they're stalking during hunting. And even that example of my dog looking at a rabbit, he is completely quiet because he doesn't want to give away his position, so to speak. If you're hunting, you don't want the rabbit or the squirrel to know that you are about to pounce on them. Tail. So there are different tail positions. And when I say tail position, I think of the base of the tail, not necessarily the tip. So there's where they can put it, but then there's also movement. So one of the things I want to point out too, and I think this will help answer one of the questions from the ears, is for dogs that have cropped ears or long ears, they can still move the base of their ear. For dogs that have, you know, a curly tail, like think of a Nordic breed as a husky, they can still lower because we're looking at the base of the tail. Dogs that have dock tails, for example, like a boxer or a Rottweiler, can still move that nub up, neutral, and down. So they can move them in different places. So looking at sort of the four positions that we have here for our slides, the first one that we'll start with on the left is tucked. Now you would typically see this kind of tail posture when the dog is in some sort of situation that he's afraid. So you have this tucked tail. Sometimes dogs tuck it so much it actually touches their abdomen, so it can be extremely tucked. This one isn't so much, but still it's between the legs, so that's what we're looking at. Tail base is completely flat, and it wraps around in between his legs. To the right, we have low. So what I mean by low is looking at the base of that tail. If you were to draw a line straight out, this tail is below that line, so it's low. Neutral is that line extended out, so it's in a neutral position. It's not low, it's not tucked, and it's not high like the photo on the right. High being, take that neutral tail and anything above neutral, and that can vary, right? There's quite a range there of degrees, if you will, but that base of the tail is high. And in this photo on the right, the tip is actually tucked over as well, but we're really focusing on where's the base of the tail. So this is a photo that has all three positions. So you can see the dog on the right, if we're the light-colored dog. If we're looking at the base of the tail, the base is up. So this dog has a tail posture that's high. The dog in the middle, yeah, I can't even tell what he is, but maybe a herding mix, the dark-colored dog. His tail is low, so if you look at the base of the tail and we were to draw a line straight out, it's just below that, so it's a more low tail position. And then the last dog on the left, more neutral, right? It looks like if you were to look at where his tail is attached to his spine, it comes straight out, and it's certainly like off to one side, but the actual position is neutral. And there's movement. So again, the tail can move in lots of ways. They may sweep side to side in a wide arc. You can commonly see that when dogs greet each other. When dogs are playing is another common example of the rotation. They may circle their tail, and this, like the tip of their tail, if it had a paintbrush, it would draw a circle on a palette. Or, you know, they may hold their tail really high, for example, and just the tip might be moving side to side in a fairly rapid way, and that could also be in a greeting as well. Again, there are many options. We're just looking at keeping it in context, but for our purposes here, just to notice where is the tail and how does it move. Hackles. So that would be the hair that actually goes from the back of the neck across the shoulders and down across the tail. Sometimes that hair can stand up. Piloerection is the term, but the hair stands up, and it may occur along the whole length of the dog's back, so it may include the shoulders, the whole thing. Other times you might just see it in patches. And this photo to the right is actually my dog. You can actually see that the shoulders have some hackling as well. Typically, it looks like a little, like a scrub brush right above his tail. It sort of puffs up. Whereas the dog on the left, the whole spine is actually raised up. And this is a video, and I want you to focus your attention on the dog to the left. And we'll wait a second before playing it again. Specifically, what I want you to look for is the mouth and the tail changes. We might do it one more time. The tail is softly wagging back and forth and then drops and stops its movement. Yep. And the mouth went through a lot of changes, opening and then close, and then there was a lip lick. So lots of things happening, right? And this video is slowed down, and even then it can be hard to sort of capture it all. But this video certainly you can play over and over again in your recording to help break apart these things. But just the first step would be just noticing how behavior changes in particular. That's what we're really curious in. Oops. Okay, just went, yeah. So body posture. So one thing to think about is consider how the dog carries their body weight. And again, that is going to change, and it can change very quickly, but they use their body to communicate. So how they carry that weight can be really important to notice. One example would be they could shift their weight forward. And on both of these pictures, these dogs are leaning forward. And these squares, I think, really do help you to see that. In that.
Oh, Heather, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm on slide 38.
Uh-oh. I'll go back.
I have the ball right now.
Okay.
Should I advance?
Yes.
There we go. Let me know when to advance.
No problem.
Thank you.
So slide 38 or 39 right now?
39.
Okay, thank you. So one of the ways that dogs can communicate is their body posture, and that is by using their weight. So they may shift their weight forward. And in this example, you can see these squares are overlaid onto the picture of the dog's body, and that helps you see that it's not a squared square, it's being tipped forward, and that's because of where their weight is. Their weight is more on their front limbs than their back. Next slide. Compare that to square. So these are dogs that have sort of as much as possible equal weight between their front half and their back half, and that's more of a square posture. And lastly, next slide, they can have their weight back. So again, the square goes in the other direction now, that most of their weight is on their back limbs. Now, these, I've just given you three absolutes, right? And remember that all behavior falls on this spectrum. So it can be extremely forward, it can be extremely back. And actually this photo to the right, I don't have a full body photo of this, but I think it's enough that you can appreciate how far forward that greyhound's limbs are. So he's really leaning back, almost in a lie-down position. So you can have these big extremes, and most of the time dogs are going to be somewhere in the middle. But again, it's the first step is just noticing where their weight is, and this isn't necessarily a topic that I don't think it's a lot of attention, but it is a huge part of how dogs use their body.
Hey, and Heather, we've got a couple questions about.
Yes, please.
What's the significance of the different, whether their weight is forward or back?
Yeah, so again, it's the context. The first step would be to notice it. So let me paint a picture of an example. So let's just say you have a dog that you're walking on a leash, whether that be someone working in a shelter or it's your own personal pet. You're walking your dog on the leash and another dog is approaching. So body weight would be just one thing that we could look at to decide what to do in that kind of situation. If the dog that you have on the end of your leash is leaning back, and let's talk about some other things, his ears are back, his tail is tucked so much that it's up against his belly, his eyes are big, maybe you see the whites of his eyes. This is a dog that we may think he doesn't want the other dog to approach him. So we could do lots of things, go off the path, go behind a car, do other things to give that dog some distance that might allow him to feel more comfortable. Contrast that if you're walking your dog on a leash and now instead of having his body language back with his tail tucked, his body language is leaning forward and his tail is high and his ears are forward and his lip is short and maybe he starts growling. That's a completely different picture, and we still may increase distance, so get away from the other dog. So the end result could be the same, or it might not. It would just really depend on the context. But the first step would be noticing where that body language is to give you the tools to actually do something about it.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Were there other questions right now? Is there another one?
I think we're keeping up with them. Emily and Trish are answering a few, and
okay.
So we're in good shape right now.
Okay, thanks. So Valerie, I'm ready for play. Thank you. So a play bow, which you see here, the front half of the dog's body goes down and the back half stays up, and often the tail is high, just like that. That is an invitation to another dog, and they even use it with people. I've seen dogs use it with cats, so it might be universal. But a play bow is an invitation to play. And the thing with play is that you can see a wide range of behaviors after this invite has been accepted. So in this case, we have a very large dog doing a play bow. The dog sort of peeking in on the edge of the picture. He may also think, play, bow back. And then we might see a whole cascade of behaviors that if you were just to take a still snapshot, it might look alarming. There might be biting limbs, like grabbing limbs with their mouth. They might be grabbing each other's neck. They might be tumbling their bodies around in the grass. You can see all sorts of things that out of context might be alarming or even look like aggression, but that play bow is the indicator that, hey, we are playing, and you can see a whole cascade of behaviors, but it's really that bow that we're looking for, that invite. Next slide. And certainly not all dogs maybe want to play or want to keep playing. So dogs also have communication that they use, and cutoff cue is a word, or no fight. These are all labels that we've put on to sort of so that we can agree what these behaviors are. But you can see the photo on the, well, actually both of these dogs are pretty, the dog on the right is about to lie down, the dog on the left is lying down. But these are dogs that were engaged in play, and now they're actually cutting off. No more play, please. Lying down, rolling over, even avoidance, so simply walking away. Other cues you might see are, if two dogs were engaged in play, one dog might suddenly stop, sniff his back end, or start itching his collar, sniffing the ground. All of these things, there's lots of behaviors, but the lying down is a very clear cue that they want to either stop the interaction or possibly they're trying to avoid an interaction. Next slide. And here we see these two together. So the dog on the left is doing a play bow, and the dog on the right is staying lateral. So this is at Basset Fest, which is quite a place to see about 100 Bassets all in one place. And there's a lot of playing going on, and this was sort of towards the end of the day, and the dog on the right was sleeping, but the dog on the left came over and tried to engage, and the dog on the left the dog on the right stayed lateral. So one dog wants to play, and the other dog is giving very clear cues that it's a cutoff, like I'm not playing right now. Decline the invite. Next slide. So this is a still photo, again, just to practice your observation skills, and I encourage you to do this after the webinar. Look at photos of your own online. I mean, there's a lot of resources for photos. Look at your own dogs playing. Once you start getting at movement, I think it's much harder, so I would practice on still photos first. But just look and actually write down. I'm a big fan of writing down what you see, and that's really the way to start training your brain. So for example, on this photo, the dog on the right, if I was given this as a task, what do I see? I might write down that his ears are forward. His lip is fairly short. I can't see his eyes directly in this photo, but it does appear that he's giving direct eye contact. His head isn't turning one way or the other. It's looking straight on. His body weight is fairly square. If you were to put a square over his body, he seems fairly balanced between the front and the back. And the base of his tail is up. Compare that to the dog on the left. Ears are back rather than forward. His lip is actually fairly long. His eyes are squinty. His body weight is, if you notice his pelvis, it's sort of just tucked under a little bit. So that's a little different than the dog on the right. And then his tail actually is up. It's not neutral, right? If we were to draw a straight line, it is slightly higher than that. So his tail is in an up position. But these are things that I would just practice looking at photos and writing them down, because it has multiple benefits. Number one, it just trains your eye to see. But it also trains you to use the language that we want to be using when we're looking at dog body language. So rather than saying he's unhappy, he's aggressive, he's happy, we're actually using the language to describe what we see rather than what we interpret.
Hey,
Next slide.
This is Susan.
Yes.
I'm wondering if I can just pop in with a little clarifier, because we're having so many great situational type questions in the chat.
Oh, sure.
This is a real foundation course, and we're going to be using this chat to help us shape future webinars.
Yes.
So we'll be looking at your questions to kind of help us continue to provide really nifty and helpful information. So keep on coming back.
We're very excited to dig into this a lot more, and your voice is absolutely being heard. Next slide, Valerie. So there will be a video here, and again, all of these videos are slowed down to try and capture what's happening. So I want you to notice the change in the dog on the left. Notice the change in behavior, not the stuffed dog, I should say. There's a stuffed dog that I was using during a consult, but the actual live dog that's lying down with his tongue out right now. Watch how it changes. And we'll play it again. Watch how it goes from, the mouth goes from open to closed, closed, and then a lip lick at the very end. So this clip is 9 seconds long. In real life, it's a 1 second clip. I slowed it down to 20% of its original speed so that you can catch this behavior. Now I'm certain that the dogs see it when they're, like when this black dog is approaching, this is their language. They are fluent at this. We are not. I mean, reading canine body language is really like it's our second language. It's not something that we're born knowing how to do. So learning what dogs are actually communicating is really important. And slowing videos down, I can tell you for me personally, helped me more than any graduate degree or a class, or really taking my own videos, seeing it live. So go to a dog park, for example, or go to a shelter and just video a dog doing anything. Watch your own dog in your living room. Just video a minute or two of behavior. And what you may think, well, he's not even doing anything. But once you play that video back, you'll see a whole cascade of really subtle, these micro-expressions that are happening that we don't even see until we train our eye. So for me personally, slowing video down like this, and if you can't slow it down, certainly, you know, in QuickTime you can just advance with the arrow, click, 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 to slow it down that way can really help train your eyes to capture some of these subtle behaviors that can happen really quickly. Next slide. So this will be another video. Ignore the stuffed dog on the right, but just look at the dog on the left. And his mouth will also change. Again, so watch how his mouth closed, and then his mouth will open. It's closed, his mouth opens, and he looks away. He goes back and forth a few times. So again, we're just observing behavior, just training our eyes to see what is in front of us that the video camera can capture, and we often miss. Good, tail low, good job. Next slide. So again, the setup for this is a dog on leash, and he's actually, there's a dog at the end of the alley that he sees. So let's see what he shows us. And again, it's slowed down, so it'll be just a touch choppy. So watch his body weight, his eye contact, right? He's fairly forward. His eyes are not moving back and forth. They're fairly direct and staying on target, so whatever he's looking at the end of the alley. And there was a little subtle lip lick in there. So again, just training our eyes to see what's in front of us.
And Heather, there's a question. Are you using fancy video equipment, or what have you got going here?
What I videoed it with? Mm-hmm. A flip video camera.
Cool.
Yeah. And I did use iMovie to just slow it down, but that's it. I mean, it could be a phone, you know. It's really, yeah, and certainly if you don't have a way to slow video down, before I had the software that I have, I would just pull up QuickTime or, you know, whatever movies play, however you play your video on your computer, and you can just click through with the arrow. So if you pause on a video and click through with the arrow, it will click through frame by frame, so you can catch behavior that way.
Great.
Next slide. So for future practice, you know, this is sort of your takeaway to go out and practice. Start with a narrow focus and build. And again, I've already said use video, but when I say narrow focus, I mean, you know, start with a body part. So look at your dog for a few moments, like when this webinar ends, glance at your dog and just focus your eyes on, okay, I'm going to watch for 30 seconds, I'm just going to watch what do his ears do. And look at the base of his ear, or what do his eyes do, or his mouth, or his tail. Start training your eyes to see these parts and really noticing those changes. I mean, it's interesting to note that his body is forward or his body is back, but really, you know, when we're looking at body language in the real world, it's how is it changing and what's happening in the environment. And that's what gives us the tools to actually implement change or behavior modification, to do something about it. Watching dogs play together is instrumental, far better than any video or webinar you could do. Actually seeing dogs interact live, and especially if you're videoing, but choose one aspect to focus on. So two dogs are playing. Okay, I'm going to watch the dog on the left and just see where his weight shifts over the next few minutes. Next slide. So in summary, practice using objective language, and I cannot stress how important this is. Especially working in the shelter environment, it is crucial that we're on board with language and body language. And the ASPCA Pro has a great website. We'll send you a bunch of resources after this webinar is over, but one of them I just wanted to give you here. There's a glossary of terms. So when we say hard eye, we are all talking about the same thing. So this glossary actually has videos that you can go and look at. So when we say ears back, hard eye, all of these things are defined, and there's a video that goes with it, so that we can all be really speaking the same language, even though we're sort of agreeing on using these labels because they have a definition attached that we all agree on. Note how behavior changes. Remember that all behavior occurs on a spectrum and that there are no absolutes in behavior. And always consider the behavior and what's happening in the environment together.
And Valerie, let's go to the next slide. So, fantastic. This was our first in a evolving series of webinars, and we are so thrilled with the response to our first that we're even more motivated to keep building. So we invite you to come back, same place, same channel, April 26th, human body language and its effects on dog behavior. We'll then be moving into some defensive dog handling, leash and body skills. ASPCA Pro is the place you want to be for this summer, and thank you so much, everyone. We'll be looking at the chat to help inform our future topics. Thank you so much, Heather, and Dr. Weiss and Trish, thank you for manning the chat.